Reverend Spy, Chapter 12. In the weeks that followed, things were very quiet as far as the secret work was concerned, and Dan was very glad of it. He had lived and relived his experiences until they were about to break his nerves, and the constant task of being careful and of watching to be sure that he did not reveal anything that he shouldn't was wearing away on him until he needed a break from it. But how can a man get away from something like that? There was no answer to that question, and no remedy for the situation. But the break in activity did give him an opportunity to work at his ministry more than he had been doing for some time. During the months of intense activity, Dan had made a move and was now pastoring another church in the same town. This change had helped to move him farther away from the possibility of being discovered by the enemy, and at the same time had kept him in the same area where he had been so effective in his intelligence work. It had also kept him in the same territory with 35, for which he was very thankful. Even though he did not even know 35's real name, there had grown up a feeling of friendship between the two men, and Dan looked forward to the end of the war, and the day when 35 might even be an old-time Christian. The thought that one day the two might even fight sin and the devil together in the ministry brought pleasant dreams to the young preacher. Many times after the submarine experience, Dan reflected upon the statement of 35 that the war would soon be over. He wondered how the Bureau man could know that it would soon be ended. What inside secret did he have? What could be the basis for such a hope as that? Was there something in the making that 35 knew that other Americans did not know? Dan could not keep these thoughts from coming back to his mind again and again. No major intelligence activity took place for some time, but Dan continued to visit the Veterans Hospital and the other places where he had been able to secure much information to pass on to 35. He was told this work alone was worth a lot to the work of the Bureau, and that even if he had not become involved in the more dangerous aspects of his work, the information which he gathered from the veterans and the servicemen who passed through this city would have been worth the effort. He was exceedingly glad that he could contribute something to the war effort of his country, but prayed daily that it would soon be over. Then it happened. The tiny radio in the kitchen table almost seemed to jump up and down with the news that morning. The paper boys cried out the headlines, and all the world went agog at the sudden development. A new and terrible bomb had been dropped over a city in Japan. Tens of thousands of people had been annihilated suddenly, and the city was completely destroyed with that one bomb. The threat of more being dropped left no doubt as to the surrender of the enemy. For all practical purposes, the shooting war was over. Dan heard the news and read the headlines, as did everyone else, but over and over for days he had to slip away alone and think and pray. So this was what 35 knew about when he had spoken so confidently of the end of the war being near. But more than this, Dan now knew what they had been making in the big area where he had come so near to losing his life in defense of its secret. One moment he shuddered with the thought that he had been involved in the protection of this terrible secret, and the next he thanked God that our nation had gotten it first instead of the enemy. He saw anew and more clearly than ever a number of things. He saw now why the enemy was willing to risk so much to try to steal that secret, and why our government had gone to such lengths to protect it. He saw why 35 had continued to tell him that things could never be the same in the world, and that the material that was being manufactured in the big area would probably change the entire history of the world, and he saw now why 35 had so often assured him that his work as a civilian agent was as important to the war effort as anything that anyone else was doing. It was weeks before Dan's sleep approached anything near normal, and as long as he lived, there were to be nights when he would almost jump out of the bed. He knew that he had done his duty. He knew that God had protected him in it. He knew that his country was again threatened and his services were needed, that he would be willing to do the same things again. He had no regrets for his actions and lived with a good conscience as to his activities, even though he and he alone could share that feeling. Many times after the war, he was faced with slurs against the ministry when veterans found that he did not go to the battlefield, but he would simply grin and take it, knowing that he probably had faced more imminent death than his accusers. But when asleep, his subconscious being would take over, and again he would relive those experiences, many times with more terrible outcomes than actually happened. Poor Lori was not to know what it was that bothered her man, and so laid it to tension, worry, nerves, diet, etc. In Dan's mind, it was all over, and he went about his duties as a pastor with a lighter heart and a freer sense of well-being than he had known for more than 5 years. That is, until that night at prayer meeting when a stranger came in.